This might be the new tow vehicle for a lot of people.
It's already scraping. I haven't even got to the hard bit yet. It's got to be one of the biggest new car releases this year, the brand new V6 Ford Ranger. Now, we're very excited to be testing this one, but a lot of people have been asking, how does it stack up compared to the old one, the old 3.25 cylinder? Well, today we're going to find out exactly. We've got Rob from Ultimate Diesel Tuning, and today we're going to put these vehicles through a series of tests. Firstly, I'm going to get them up into my shed, get them on the hoist, have a good look underneath. And basically, we've had this one out in the bush for a couple of days now. We've tested it pretty hard off-road. We want to see any damage underneath, what's exposed, what's vulnerable, and whether or not this will make a great bush-proof vehicle. We're also going to chuck a load on the back, tow 2 tons, and see how they both tow. And I think last, mate, if we can borrow your workshop, we'll get them on the dyno and see if this really is the powerhouse it's made out to be.
Well, I must say, no doubt there's hype, but the power out of this thing, 180 kilowatts, what's it really going to do on the dyno?
I can't wait to see. Let's buckle up and find out. If you do notice a fair bit of dirt hanging around the engine bay and especially underneath the vehicle, it's because Rob and I have had this out for the last few days, testing it off-road in some pretty harsh conditions in Coffs Harbour. If you haven't checked it out already, this year's Ute of the Year was an absolute cracker. We pitched 6 of the best utes in Australia against the challenging tracks of Coffs Harbour over 4 gruelling days. We pushed these stock standard utes harder than we've ever done before. The next gen Ranger won as a new kid on the block as an all-round great package. But is it better than the last Ranger? And what's changed? Let's take a closer look at why it was a standout at this year's Ute of the Year. Righto, so first up we've hooked up my boat. The boat and trailer are roughly 2 tonne. Let's see how the next gen compares to the 4th gen 3.2 litre. The first impressions are that the Ranger hardly even notices the boat is on the back. Now, previously, my experience towing this boat has been with a 79 series or a 200 series, and both of those vehicles did it very easy. But the Ranger's in the same sort of league, it feels like, except it's a lot quieter and it's pretty darn comfortable. You've got to keep in mind that the boat weighs about 2 tonne, so it's not exactly anywhere near what this vehicle can legally tow at 3.5 tonne. But it's doing the 2 tonne very easy. I mean, if you had a camper trailer on the back of this thing, or even a hybrid camper or something like that, it's going to be pulling it very easily. You're not going to even notice it's there. 3.5 tonne, on the other hand, might be a bit of a different story. It might be, you know, hunting through the gears a lot more, and you really might feel that weight, and even the vehicle being dictated to by that heavy weight in the back of the vehicle. Because this weighs more than the 2 tonnes on the back, I think it's towing it very, very nicely.
So we're going to go up an elevation here, starting from sort of 30 k's an hour. You can see we just put the foot down. That torque really delivers going up the hill, really does it easy. I'm actually really excited about this platform because I think unleashing a little bit more power will make this vehicle an absolute tow monster. Give a real run for some of those 200 and 300s on the market that have been fetching premium dollars. This might be the new tow vehicle for a lot of people.
Always been a fan of this model Ranger, the 3.2 litre, the 6-speed auto. It's been very solid, and the previous generation Ford Ranger, the 3.2 litre, is a good vehicle, but is a little bit lackluster when it is towing compared to the new Ranger. The new Ranger makes a stack more torque, and it's very noticeable in the driver's seat. When you do tune these ones though, they do go very good. In fact, they would be pretty much on par with the new Ranger. But as a tow vehicle, you wouldn't be disappointed with the 3.2, but definitely the new V6 takes the cake.
This has obviously been around since 2012, this engine configuration. Been a really great vehicle and very popular for Ford. Towing wise, they're really good. Torque delivery is nice as well, but I certainly, after getting out of the new V6 Ranger, I could notice a difference. Just driving up that elevation, it just had a little bit more oomph.
The 10-speed is an awesome transmission for the V6 too, and I reckon we'll see a lot more four-wheel drives with a lot more gears coming soon because they can keep the engine revving around peak torque a lot more often. That's great for all kinds of driving, especially towing and off-road, because you've got better control and more power when you need it. Well, it's not every day in a new car test you get to actually get that vehicle, put it on a dyno and see some real world numbers, because the numbers that you see from the manufacturer are printed on those glossy brochures are what they make at the engine. Isn't that right, Rob?
Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of confusion when someone goes onto a dyno. We're actually recording the power and torque figures at the tyres. So it loses all that power through the drivetrain, which is known as drivetrain loss.
Drivetrain loss. And there's going to be, for those guys with a keen eye that are watching this, you'll notice that it does have a set of Goodyear tyres on it. They're slightly bigger than standard. So if anything, the results we're about to have a look at is probably a bit of a disadvantage for the brand new Ranger. That being said, let's look at the numbers because this is absolutely amazing. Now the 3.2, the old Ranger, made 105 kilowatts and 315 newton meters, which, that's pretty impressive numbers, very drivable.
And that's pretty much what all 3.2s do, give or take a little bit. That's a standard number, what you'd expect on a PX2, PX3 Ranger.
Now the big V6, the new Ranger, making 140 kilowatts at the tyres and a massive 467 newton meters of torque. That's amazing, surely.
Yeah, well look, I think it's fair to say, Sean, both you and I are in the car. I'm not surprised about the numbers, right?
Yeah, sure. You could tell when you're behind the wheel, this thing has so much more power than the old one. But when you actually see it in numbers like this, because, I've had a 79 series before and everyone thinks 79's almost the pinnacle of power. When you get a standard 79 V8, what do they make on the dyno?
Well, that's the heartbreaking piece, right? Because when you bring one of those in here in standard, it usually runs about 110 kilowatts and 340 newton meters at the tyres. So it's very disappointing, but there's obviously a lot of power unleashed out of a 79. Yeah,
of course, and when you do tune it, they achieve numbers probably similar to what you're seeing right now. That Ranger is amazing, stock standard format. So that's one thing, the power difference is making a lot more power than the 3.2, but the big question a lot of people probably have is how is it making that extra power?
Well, it's two things that achieves it. Is obviously one of them in particular is what we're looking at here is fueling. It's using more fueling to achieve the power, and obviously we're looking at the vehicle with the foot flat to the floor, so we're not looking at it on partial throttle, it's flat to the floor, and the vehicle uses a lot more fuel. If you can use this as an air-fuel ratio, the air-fuel ratio, when you're at about, say, 2200 RPM, is up as high as 24 air-fuel ratio. When you compare that, we're sort of down here at 18. So it uses, with a diesel, Sean, as you know, sooty, plumes out the diesel, it uses more diesel, it generates more power as well.
Yeah, exactly right.
And that's not a surprise, I'd expect that as well.
And obviously, fuel is one thing, boost is another.
And you back that with boost pressure, so fuel and boost is a combination that makes energy with that engine to produce power and torque.
Did you see any differences in boost between the old 3.2 and the new V6?
Well, we can have a look at that as well. So
yeah,
we'll bring
right.
it up.
Before we look at the boost figures, remember, the 3.2 litre is old now. It's been in production for 13 years. The technology is pretty dated now, but the new V6 is full of improved technology and strengthened components that help make more power with better efficiency.
Rob, now you've got boost pressure up on the screen here between the two vehicles. So the blue is obviously the old Ranger, red is the new one. There's a bit of a difference there.
Yeah, there is. And look, in relation to the boost pressure on the 3.2 litre Ranger, around 2000 RPM, Sean, it's doing about 18 PSI pressure.
And that's peak boost.
That's peak. And as you can see, it tapers right off down to as low as 14 higher in the rev range. And you'll see the similar sort of curve with the V6 Ranger. At around 2000, the peak boost pressure is around 26 PSI.
Of the V6 Ranger.
And the V6 Ranger, yeah.
So what do you think the future tunability is for the new V6 Ranger? You've got the 2 litre twin turbo on the other hand, which was very highly strung and, we couldn't get a lot of results out of that one. Do you think this will be the same?
Yeah, look, go back to that, Sean. The 2 litre bi-turbo runs significantly more boost. We're talking probably up close to 30 PSI boost in that 2 litre engine. And the fueling is probably even a little bit richer, standard as a comparison. So to answer your question...
So that's highly strung. So
this isn't, yes, there's some different numbers compared to the 3.2, but the 2 litres is the next jump again. To look at the improvements in tuning, I think early on in the rev range, we'll get some nice improvements there. We can get the fueling to come in, we can improve the boost pressure, how that comes on. So really tidy up and take time in tuning it. We'll see some nice gains in both power and torque, which just complements an all-round really impressive vehicle.
It really does, and this is the thing, I suppose, the 2 litre, even though it's more highly strung, and this is not part of our test, but it's worth probably noting that even though it has higher boost, probably more fuel, it doesn't make as much power as that V6.
Oh, it doesn't even come close. It's actually line bore with the 3.2 litre engine.
Yeah, right, and it's really highly strung. The V6 doesn't seem to be as highly strung, even though it does, use a fair bit more boost and fuel than the 3.2. But the good news is, if you reckon you'll be able to work with that to make this thing even more of a beast, I can't wait to drive that version.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited, and I think that's why everyone else is really excited about the new V6 Next Gen Ranger, because we know the numbers stacked up on paper, but we've proven today the numbers stack up on the dyno.
Yep.
I've been driving this car for over a week, doing a lot of testing with it, and I'm really excited to see the next evolution of the Next Gen Ranger.
Got it down at my shed. We're going to open the engine bay, have a good look underneath. Now, if you do notice a fair bit of dirt hanging around the engine bay and especially underneath the vehicle, it's because Rob and I have had this out for the last few days, testing it off-road in some pretty harsh conditions in Coffs Harbour. So we make no apologies for that, but we also want to get it up on the hoist, have a good look underneath, see what's been hit off-road, what's been vulnerable, what's changed from the old model, and just have a general good look underneath. But first things first, mate, the engine, the heart and soul of the big Ranger. Let's take a look.
First thing I noticed, Sean, in the engine bay, there's a heap more room. We're talking about a V6 engine. There's a fair bit of space in front of these thermo fans. We've got more space over here next to the airbox, where obviously for additional batteries potential as well. It's got a forward-facing intake on it.
Yep.
I don't know, mate. What's your thoughts on that when you go forward driving and you're in some water?
Well, I think everyone will understand that that's the first place water's going to get sucked up as soon as you go through. Even though it's got some pretty decent sealing, it's still going to come all through this grill and come straight up into here. If it can get air, it can definitely get water, and that's got the first thing likely to happen off-road. And it also gives me the impression that Ford maybe didn't intend for this vehicle to go as hard off-road, just by initial looking at that, because it's not in the guard, it's not hidden, they've made no effort to do that.
Well, that's the other thing with the guard, Sean. This, obviously the water reservoir, it's taking up that whole part of the guard where you usually see obviously guys are now making snorkels for these, but you can see it's really got to tuck in tight through the back end of the airbox of the front here.
And there'll be a little bit of relocation needed.
Yeah.
It's got a very small airbox, wouldn't you say?
For a V6 engine, if we compare to the likes of the airbox on the 300 series, it's a lot larger in volume.
Yep.
But obviously the efficiency's there, it's made the power.
Yeah, exactly right. What's your opinion on, it's got a lot of plastic I see in the engine bay, so all your intake piping's all plastic?
Yeah, that seems to be the way a lot of new vehicles are going. This is obviously a solid moulded plastic, the intercooler pipes, that's our biggest concern. Legacy 3.2 and the other ones, the pipes actually got cracks in them here. So you can see they've really revised this, and that's more, obviously longevity I think is going to be a good thing, even though it is plastic. Yep. It's not just a rubber hose.
Well, nothing seems to be rubbing on it. The engineers would have thought about a lot of that stuff. We did mention one thing before. They've gone away from a standard engine fan and now with a thermo fan. Now, a lot of cars are doing that, but cars, not four-wheel drive so much.
Well, we talk about water crossings.
Exactly. And look, I think there's a lot of gap between the back of the radiator and the front of this fan, and it is quite a rigid fan, so I don't think it's going to flex necessarily and cause issues with the radiator. What I'm worried about is when you're out in the bush, middle of nowhere, and then you have an electrical gremlin, blow a fuse, a relay, something like that, you might not have a spare on hand. All of a sudden that renders the vehicle out of action because it's going to overheat, the fans won't go, won't keep it cool, and that's my biggest concern about thermo fans. There's no redundancy. And the next thing probably to look at is you've got this engine cowling here, you've got this massive big cover. Under that, what's...
Yeah, so Sean, that's in the valley of the V6 engine is where the actual cartridge is for the oil filter. So
okay.
It's obviously not that easy to locate, obviously standing here.
Well, if you've got short arms like me, I can just sort of reach that. I'd have to step up in there. Maybe more difficult to service, I'm not sure. But there does seem like a lot of space, so it wouldn't be too hard to work on, I don't think, this engine.
I don't think it's a major issue, given the cartridge and the way it sits. Mm-hmm. The other one was up under the guard on the 3.2 litre engine there.
Yep.
So in saying that, this is probably easy to access. It's just in the middle of the car, and for us, probably requires a milk crate here in the shed.
Yeah, exactly right. Another thing that gives me a little bit of confidence is changing the location of the ECU. They've taken it from in the engine bay, essentially, and put it up on the firewall.
Mounted it higher in the firewall of the car.
So that's nice. It's nice and protected up there, and unlikely to get disturbed by too much water ingress, dust or stuff like that.
Talking about cooling, Sean, you know that's really important, especially turbocharged engines having the right amount of air volume to go across the front of the car. Fine on a standard car, but when you start putting accessories, light bars, big
Canopy
spotties,
on the back, maybe bit of
loading it up,
yep,
and then you put a bar in the front, throw the winch in.
Yep.
My biggest concern is, you know, you come down here, this is the heart of what keeps your engine nice and cool, that charge from the turbocharger, that air, making sure it gets cooled before it heads back straight into the engine. We've got the sensors there, which is obviously like adaptive cruise control. It sort of blocks out a third of the front area and surface area for the intercooler. You throw a winch in here.
Yeah.
My concern is how much of that's going to get blocked with some of these aftermarket bars blocking up that intercooler surface area.
And you're spot on with all the accessories at the front of the vehicle, and then you start to add a lot more weight and put a more load on the vehicle. You might want to tow a caravan as well.
Let's throw 3 tonne behind it.
Yeah, then you could find yourself in a situation where it's not been as efficient as it could. Overheating issues was a bit of an issue with some of the earlier ranges, especially like the 2-litre twin turbo, especially with the auto. Have you been able to find the auto cooler?
I reckon when we pop it up on the hoist, be
Have a
right
good
underneath
look.
the car where the other one is as well.
Yep. So first things first, it's a very similar setup to the old Ranger, very similar suspension, bash plates. It's got quite comprehensive bash plates. They're a thin, mild steel bash plate. I'd suggest you probably want to upgrade these.
You want to get rid of those.
You can see the scrapes that we've had off-road already. Quite a few big hits off-road, and we've only taken on some pretty light tracks.
You can see this, Sean, like that's a big surprise.
Look at that, that's the back of the DPF is down nice and low. Very vulnerable position as well, because as you cruise over rocks and things, the first thing that's going to hit is that. And Rob, I'm not an expert in this subject, mate. Are these expensive? If you want to replace a DPF?
They're far from cheap. You got no change, 3, 4, 5 grand.
Gee, and look where it is. I know you've got a sway bar here, you've got a cross member here, but this is still very vulnerable. You come over a couple of big rocks. We've only had this off-road for 3 days and we've managed to put a dent in it already.
Hopefully the guys doing the underbody protection are running
big plates
all around here. That's going to protect your transmission.
Exactly.
The exhaust system there with the DPF.
Probably one of the first mods I'd do the underbody of this vehicle is run a big heavy duty bash plate right up. As you move further along.
So this is obviously the back where the transfer is. That's another little...
Yep, it's protected. In our case, it's been very good at collecting a lot of dirt, sticks, mud, rocks, all sorts of stuff from Coffs Harbour. It sort of scooped it up.
This is an interesting one. Big topic on the 300.
Yeah.
Fuel filter at the back of the car. Here's the fuel filter underneath the car on the new Ranger, which used to be in the engine bay.
Used to be in the engine bay. It's down there, I guess, to save space more than anything. It's protected probably, I'd say, more than the 300 series. It's got this cross member, runs right through here, and a little stone guard, which is at least made out of metal, unlike the 300 series.
It was plastic.
The other thing, we're looking for the transmission cooler.
Yeah, so the transmission cooler, it's actually in the same position as the 3.2 litre transmission on the 6-speed.
Yep.
Little cooler on the side of the box.
And is that efficient? Well, I've always been taught, and maybe it's a little bit old school of me, but front, getting the first bit of air available before you're in a cooler, before anything, your transmission cooler needs to be there. The last thing you want is your transmission overheating, especially when you start towing things.
Yeah, for everyday driving, not a concern. It's when you're going through elevation, towing 3 tonne, your vehicle's loaded up, shifting through the gears. The telltale for this one, 10-speed transmission. So the amount of times we're going to be shifting through the gears, is that cooler going to stack up to the job?
And when you're shifting through the gears a lot, it's going to create heat.
Temperature.
It's not going to be in the lock-up stage, so things are going to get quite warm. Come back here. It's all pretty standard. This is this cross member.
That's what was getting caught up.
You can see we've scratched nearly all the paint off this cross member already. It's got every colour of clay from Coffs Harbour here. It's even got some sticks and some mud. We'll put that back up there. But this is quite vulnerable. I could feel this actually when we were driving it off-road.
Felt like you're anchored on it.
Big time. It was getting caught up everywhere. Then you come back here. It's got a very similar setup to a lot of dual cab utes with the centre bearing, two-piece tail shaft at the rear.
Fuel tank.
Fuel tank's quite large, but you noticed something just before as well, Rob, that if you want an aftermarket tank, there's no room between the tail shaft and the chassis rail and the spring. So what's your only option? Maybe to come forward a little bit, but that's not going to give you too much more range.
A little bit more space forward, but the reality is the only way you're going to be able to get a larger tank is drop it.
Drop it, and then of course that's going to be quite vulnerable off-road.
And we spoke about this, getting hooked up on this,
Not a massive concern, but something to be aware of if you are planning to make this the ultimate tourer. Putting aftermarket tanks, which I understand are already available and even calibrated with the original gauge as well.
Yeah,
So which is impressive. But again, if it's going to act as a big anchor, well, it's not going to help you when you're off road. Put it
Look at the size of that muffler, Sean. That's a 2 foot long muffler in there. So that's why it's so quiet. The engine, you know, when we're driving it, it's just so quiet from behind the car as well.
You were saying before, it's got quite a thick exhaust, but the muffler obviously refines that drive quite a lot. Yeah.
With this model, sound deadening obviously is really important to try and keep it a bit quiet in the cabin. Bit of a surprise, all the felt that's under here.
Yeah, it's like the old school sort of cardboard felt pattern that you'd typically find as like under bonnet protectors, but not underneath the vehicle necessarily. That's like
that's going to get
cardboard and felt, like Rob says. That's going to get waterlogged in the first, or if we owned it, in about a week, and then it'll start perishing. And the other thing that you mentioned as well is it is a quiet vehicle, but inside the cab it's not
a bit of road noise.
A bit of road noise, and it's probably a little bit louder inside the cab than the previous model. And usually that's not the case. Usually they're trying to refine as new models come out. But I think the sound deadening is not quite up to scratch on this vehicle.
No, definitely at 100 k's an hour, there's a lot more road noise inside the car.
As you come down the back, we'll notice it does have rear disc brakes, which is not many utes on the market have rear disc brakes. They all usually have drum brakes. This is good to see. It'll stop nice.
And driving this car, the amount of k's we did in it on the highway, the brakes is not in question.
Yeah,
the quality brakes on it.
Very solid braking system. Then you come to the back of the vehicle, get the spare tyre up underneath. The exhaust is hidden away quite nicely, with the exception of the DPF.
Doesn't come all the way to the back as well?
It doesn't come all the way to the back, so it's not likely to get squashed like I tend to do on a lot of my exhausts when you start going over rocks and things like that. I'm just having a look at the back here. It does have an over-engineered rear tow bar system on this thing. It's obviously comes straight from Ford like this. Huge big bolts in the side.
It's massive.
Gives the impression that it wants to tow.
Big F truck set up at the rear, towing 4+ tonne.
Yeah, and this one's rated, of course, for 3.5 tonne. A lot of utes really are in this day and age, but I've sort of got the feeling that if there was a dual cab ute that could tow close to its legal capacity, it's probably this Ranger. Well, this is going to be the ultimate test for the brand new Ford Ranger. To put it up against its predecessor, the 3.2 litre 5-cylinder Ranger. Now, you got to keep in mind that this one is about 10 years old. It's been available in Australia for a long time now. This brand new one, though, is head and shoulders above. It's safe to say we've tested in so many different types of terrains, from the beach to the bush. We've taken it down to Coffs Harbour. We've literally put a couple of 1,000 kilometres on this particular vehicle. We've even hooked up 2 tonnes on both of them, done a tow test, and come back to Ultimate Diesel Tuning to chuck it onto the dyno to see how it actually performs in the real world and see what sort of power is at those wheels. After driving this thing for nearly a week now, we're safe to say we're very, very impressed. The only comment I'd probably make is reliability. We haven't had it long enough to really test how it's going to go in a longevity point of view, how bushproof that vehicle is, but I guess time will tell. I'd love you guys to let us know in the comments what you think of the new Ranger based on our test. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you rate it? Let us know in the comments. For me though, I'm pretty keen to drive it again. I'll see you around next time on Full Drive 24/7.